I am Naomi, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant who specializes in uncovering the financial lies people tell. 3 hours ago, I stood in the freezing Chicago rain and buried my husband Liam. He was a brilliant cybersecurity executive, only 35, taken by a sudden heart attack. Now, standing in the living room of our beautiful home in Lincoln Park, wearing a black morning dress that felt like lead, my own sister decided to shatter whatever was left of my heart. Isabella held up her infant son, looked me dead in the eyes, and announced to a room full of grieving guests that her child was the secret son of my husband. I smiled and simply said, "Show me the proof." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the absolute worst betrayal imaginable and plot your perfect revenge. The air in our custom-designed $1.8 million house was already thick with the scent of lilies and stale coffee. Dozens of friends, colleagues, and family members murmured in quiet clusters, their dark clothes a stark contrast to the bright, open-concept living space Liam and I had painstakingly built together. I was leaning against the marble kitchen island, completely numb, clutching a glass of water I had not taken a sip from in an hour. My parents, Thomas and Catherine, were holding court near the fireplace, accepting condolences, with the practiced grace of people who cared deeply about appearances. And then there was my younger sister, Isabella. At 29, she had always been the undisputed golden child of our family. She was the woman who could do no wrong, the fragile, beautiful daughter, who required constant rescuing, constant funding, and constant attention. Even today at my husband's funeral, she wore a designer black dress that looked more suited for a fashion runway than a funeral. The low hum of sympathetic chatter was suddenly pierced by the sharp ringing sound of a silver spoon tapping against crystal. I looked up to see Isabella standing by the grand staircase, clinking her champagne glass. The entire room went silent, turning to face her. She shifted her infant son Leo onto her hip. Her eyes were red, shimmering with tears that looked remarkably well-timed. She took a deep, shuddering breath, ensuring every single pair of eyes in that room was locked onto her perfectly glossed lips. "Thank you all for coming today to honor Liam," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "This is the hardest day of my life, and I know it is hard for Naomi too. But Liam and I made a promise to each other right before his heart failed. He made me promise that I would not keep our secret anymore. He wanted his true legacy to be known." I stood frozen. My fingers gripped the edge of the marble island so tightly my knuckles turned white. My brain, trained to analyze data and detect anomalies, suddenly could not process the words echoing through my own living room. Isabella let a single tear trace down her cheek. She kissed the top of Leo's head and looked directly at me. "I am so sorry, Naomi. I really am. But Leo is Liam's son. We hid our affair for 2 years because we did not want to hurt you. But Liam wanted me to tell the truth today. He wanted his boy to be recognized. He wanted his son to have his rightful home." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating and heavy. It felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I could hear my own pulse roaring in my ears like a freight train. A heavy, sickening wave of nausea washed over me, starting from my chest and dropping straight into my stomach. The floor beneath my black heels seemed to tilt. Then the whispers began. They started as low, hissed breaths from the back of the room. I watched the eyes of Liam colleagues dart from Isabella to the baby and then to me. I saw my neighbors exchanging wide-eyed glances. The pity I had seen in their faces just hours ago at the cemetery rapidly morphed into morbid curiosity and shock. The atmosphere shifted from respectful mourning to a suffocating spectacle of public humiliation. Every single person in that room was waiting for me to collapse, to scream, or to run away, hiding my face in shame. My own sister had just declared on the day I buried the love of my life that she had been sleeping with him, that they had a child together, and that my entire marriage was a pathetic lie. I stared at Leo, trying to find any trace of Liam in his small face. There was nothing. Just Isabella features staring back at me. Yet the guests were already looking at the boy, as if he were the tragic heir to a broken kingdom. The sheer audacity of her timing was paralyzing. She did not choose to tell me this in private. She chose an audience. She chose the exact moment when my defenses would be stripped away, surrounded by influential people whose opinions mattered to our social standing. She wanted maximum destruction. My analytical mind, usually so precise, fractured into 1,000 pieces. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. My breathing turned shallow. Was it true? Had the man who brought me coffee every morning been sneaking into my sister bed? The whispers grew louder, crawling under my skin. I could hear phrases like "poor woman" and "how embarrassing" echoing off the high ceilings. I stood an empty shell, desperately trying to anchor myself to the cold counter, realizing the nightmare of losing my husband was only just beginning. Before I could even process the sheer magnitude of Isabella's fabricated confession, the crowd parted again. DeAndre pushed his way to the front. He always moved through my house as if he owned it, and today his arrogance radiated through the room like toxic heat. He placed a large protective hand on Isabella's waist, playing the role of the stoic, supportive husband to perfection. The fact that his wife had just publicly confessed to carrying another man's child did not seem to faze him in the slightest. There was no anger in his eyes, no betrayal, no shock. That was my first clue. DeAndre was not a victim in this circus, he was the director. With a theatrical sigh, DeAndre reached into the inner breast pocket of his maroon jacket. The audience held its collective breath as he pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment paper. He held it up for the entire room to see, making sure the guests caught a glimpse of the formal-looking text and the bold blue ink at the bottom. He cleared his throat, his deep voice easily overpowering the quiet murmurs of the funeral guests. "I know this is a massive shock to everyone here," DeAndre announced, addressing the crowd before turning his cold, hard gaze directly on me. But Liam did not want to leave this world with a lie on his conscience. He wanted to make things right for his true bloodline. A week before his sudden heart attack, Liam met with Isabella and me. He asked us to help him secure his legacy. DeAndre took 2 slow, deliberate steps toward the kitchen island where I stood. He slapped the piece of parchment down onto the marble countertop right in front of me. "This is Liam's final will," DeAndre declared, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. "Signed and executed just 7 days ago. In it, Liam explicitly revokes all previous agreements. He left this entire $1.8 million estate, this exact house we are standing in, to his true blood, heir Leo. Pack your bags, Naomi. This house belongs to my wife and Liam's son now. You're just a barren widow taking up space." The cruelty of his words, weaponizing my painful struggle with infertility in front of my friends and colleagues, was designed to break me completely. It was designed to send me fleeing up the stairs in a flood of hysterical tears, conceding the battlefield to them. I heard someone in the back of the room gasp. I saw a colleague of Liam's take a step forward as if to intervene, only to be held back by his wife. Everyone expected me to shatter. But I did not shatter. The blinding wave of panic that had gripped me just moments ago suddenly evaporated, replaced by an icy, absolute calm. The emotional grieving widow vanished. The forensic accountant took over. My daily life consisted of dismantling complex financial frauds, tracing hidden offshore accounts, and analyzing corporate lies. DeAndre had just handed me a physical piece of evidence, and my professional instincts violently overpowered my grief. I looked down. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply reached out and picked it up. The paper was standard high-grade resume stock, the kind you could buy in bulk at any local office supply store. Not the specialized watermarked legal folio paper our actual estate attorney used. I let my eyes scan the text. DeAndre smirked, clearly mistaking my silence for defeat. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, waiting for my surrender. But as I read the paragraphs, the glaring anomalies jumped out at me one by one. The document was an absolute disaster. The formatting was slightly misaligned with inconsistent paragraph spacing. The legal phrasing was painfully amateurish, filled with redundant jargon that read like a template downloaded from a cheap internet legal site. A genuine corporate lawyer like the one Liam and I retained would never write, "hereby and forever bequeath the dwelling located at the aforementioned coordinates," in such a clumsy, archaic manner. Then my eyes moved to the bottom of the page. The signature. My breath caught slightly. The signature was flawless. The sharp sweeping L and the distinct hurried cross of the T in Liam's last name were absolutely perfect. I had seen that signature on thousands of documents, checks, and anniversary cards. It was undoubtedly my husband's actual handwriting. The blue ink showed the correct pressure points where Liam pressed his pen into the page. But the context surrounding the signature was entirely wrong. There was no notary seal. The two witness signatures scribbled below Liam's name were completely illegible and lacked printed names or contact information. The ink of the text body had a slight sheen indicating a standard laser printer, while the signature alignment suggested the text was printed over a blank sheet that had already been signed. My mind raced assembling the pieces of the puzzle at lightning speed. DeAndre and Isabella had somehow obtained a blank piece of paper bearing Liam's genuine signature. Then they had drafted this ridiculous legally void document and printed it right over his name. They were betting everything on shock value. They foolishly banked on my crushing emotional devastation to completely blind me to the glaring factual errors in their forged counterfeit masterpiece. They thought my grief would make me weak. They wrongly thought I would quickly surrender my precious home and all my hard-earned assets just to escape the terrifying public humiliation they so carefully orchestrated. I slowly lowered the paper. I looked at DeAndre's highly arrogant, expectant face. I looked at Isabella, who was watching me with wide, triumphant eyes while holding the baby she claimed was my husband's child. My pulse stabilized into a slow, steady rhythm. The roaring in my ears faded into complete crystal-clear silence. I knew exactly what they were doing, and I knew exactly how I was going to destroy them. I slowly lifted my gaze from the fraudulent document and looked across the room toward my parents. Thomas and Catherine stood perfectly still near the marble fireplace. For a brief, foolish second, the wounded inner child inside me desperately hoped they would intervene. I expected my mother to march over, snatch that ridiculous forgery out of DeAndre's hands, and banish him from my home. I waited for them to fiercely defend my dignity and the sanctity of my marriage. Instead, Catherine moved. She walked right past me without a single glance in my direction. She crossed the hardwood floor, wrapped her arms tightly around Isabella, and cooed softly into her ear. My mother then turned to face me, her expression instantly hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated ice. "You have a successful accounting career, Naomi," Catherine stated, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "You make more than enough money. You can easily go out and rent a nice apartment downtown. Isabella has a baby to raise. Do the right thing and leave." The sheer audacity of her demand hit me like a physical strike to the chest. She was actually kicking me out of the very home I had personally financed for us, demanding I hand over the keys to a cheating sister and her manipulative husband. Catherine did not question the absurdity of the will or how Liam could possibly hide a child for 2 years. She simply accepted the convenient narrative because it benefited her favorite daughter. Before I could even respond, my father stepped forward. Thomas always viewed our family as a fragile corporate entity that needed ruthless public relations management. He positioned himself squarely beside DeAndre, effectively forming a solid, united barricade against me. He adjusted his silk tie and lowered his voice into the commanding tone he usually reserved for unruly employees. "We are handling this quietly and internally," Thomas warned, locking his cold eyes onto mine. "You will not hire any slick corporate lawyers. You will not contest this document in probate court. And you absolutely will not drag this family name through the mud because of your selfish pride. Isabella made a mistake, but Liam wanted to provide for his biological son. You need to respect your late husband's final wishes." He took one step closer, his face twisting into a scowl of pure disdain. "If you fight your sister on this, Naomi, you are done. We will cut you off completely. You will be dead to us. Do not force me to disown you over a piece of real estate." The betrayal was complete and suffocating. They were choosing the golden child and her husband over the grieving widow. They were willing to erase my entire decade-long marriage just to ensure Isabella remained comfortable and shielded from her own life choices. They viewed me as nothing more than a stepping stone to elevate their favored daughter. DeAndre smirked, thoroughly enjoying my total isolation. He had successfully weaponized my own flesh and blood against me. He expected me to break down sobbing. He expected me to scream about the injustice, to beg for my parents to love me, to create a hysterical scene that would only further validate their narrative that I was an unstable, bitter woman. I gave them absolutely nothing. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at the smug, entitled faces of my family. I looked at Catherine clutching the baby she foolishly believed was her new royal grandson. I looked at Thomas, puffing out his chest with misplaced patriarchal authority. I looked at Isabella hiding her vicious smirk behind a well-rehearsed mask of tragic sorrow. And finally, I looked at DeAndre, the arrogant mastermind who genuinely believed he had just outsmarted a top-tier forensic accountant. I held the forged paper out toward DeAndre. He snatched it back with a triumphant sneer, assuming I had surrendered. Instead, I let a slow, chilling, dead-eyed smile spread across my face. I made sure my voice was loud enough, calm enough, and sharp enough to echo clearly across the dead, silent room. "Fine, but show me the legal proof." DeAndre faltered, his arrogant smirk slipping for a fraction of a second. "What did you just say?" "I said fine," I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously smooth. "If Liam truly wanted you to have this house, I will not stand in the way of his dying wishes. But this is a $1.8 million estate. The county recorder office does not transfer properties based on a single printed page and a dramatic announcement at a funeral. If you want the keys to this house, you have to process that piece of paper through probate court. You have to file it legally. So go ahead, DeAndre. Show me the legal proof. File it." I watched a microscopic flash of panic dart across Isabella's eyes. She clearly had not anticipated me demanding official legal procedures. She thought my parents bullying me would force a quiet, off-the-books surrender. DeAndre, however, quickly recovered his bravado, puffing out his chest once more. "Watch me," he scoffed, waving the fake will in my face. "I will have this filed by Monday morning. You better start packing, Naomi. Your time in this neighborhood is officially over." "Monday morning," I agreed, my smile never wavering. "I look forward to it." I turned on my heel, ignoring the shocked gasps of the remaining funeral guests, and walked calmly up the grand staircase. Let them have their fleeting moment of fake victory. Let them pop their stolen champagne and measure the windows for new curtains. They were completely blinded by their own greed, entirely unaware that I had just handed them the rope they would use to hang themselves. By officially filing a forged document in a court of law, DeAndre was about to turn a simple family lie into a major federal crime. Less than 24 hours after the funeral guests dispersed, the heavy oak front door of my home swung open. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my laptop open, reviewing client audit files, when the chaotic clatter of heavy luggage wheels dragging across the imported hardwood floors broke the morning silence. I did not look up from my screen. I already knew exactly who it was. Isabella and DeAndre marched into the foyer, dragging 4 designer suitcases behind them. They moved with the aggressive entitlement of invaders claiming a territory. Isabella held Leo tightly against her chest, while scanning the pristine living room with hungry eyes. DeAndre followed behind her, ignoring the mudroom bench. He stomped directly onto the hand-woven Persian rug, his sneakers caked with mud leaving thick brown streaks across the delicate fabric. "We are moving in," DeAndre announced, loudly, dropping 2 heavy suitcases directly onto the polished floorboards with a loud thud. He puffed his chest out, adjusting his gold chain. "My lawyer said we need to establish immediate physical residency to secure Leo's assets. We cannot trust a bitter ex-wife to maintain the estate properly while the probate paperwork clears. So we are taking over the master suite starting today." I kept my eyes locked on my spreadsheet, my fingers typing numbers rhythmically. I did not offer a single word of protest. My silence clearly unnerved Isabella, who shifted her weight anxiously, but DeAndre interpreted my lack of response as absolute submission. He walked into the center of the living room and threw himself down onto Liam's custom Italian white leather sofa. DeAndre kicked his muddy sneakers onto the pristine cushions, crossing his ankles and sighing. He rubbed his hands together, looking around the space as if he were a king surveying his throne room. Moments later, the front door opened again. My parents, Thomas and Catherine, hurried inside, carrying several cardboard moving boxes. They were panting and sweating, clearly struggling under the heavy weight. Instead of thanking them, DeAndre immediately began barking orders at my father like a hired foreman. Thomas, do not put those boxes on the floor. Take them straight upstairs to the master bedroom, DeAndre commanded, pointing a lazy finger toward the grand staircase. And when you come back down, move that giant ugly desk out of the front study. I am turning that room into my new crypto trading floor. Move it to the garage or throw it away, I do not care. I watched my father, a man who demanded absolute respect from his employees, silently nod and begin hauling boxes up the stairs like an obedient servant. Catherine scurried behind him, desperate to please the man she believed held the key to a wealthy lifestyle. They willingly destroyed their own dignity to cater to a fraud. DeAndre shifted on this ruined sofa and grabbed the television remote. He scoffed loudly, tossing the sleek metal device onto the glass table. He stood up and began pacing around the living room looking for things to insult. He stopped in front of Liam's complex smart home automation hub, a beautifully engineered piece of hardware my husband had just built from scratch. Look at all this useless nerd trash, DeAndre laughed, knocking a framed photograph of Liam and me face down onto the shelf. The guy makes decent money and spends it on blinking lights. Total loser behavior. Good thing I am here to upgrade this place. We are going to rip all this wiring out. He turned his mocking gaze toward me, stepping closer to the kitchen island. He leaned his large frame over the marble counter, invading my personal space, trying to provoke a reaction. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry over the muddy footprints on my expensive rugs and the disrespect shown to my dead husband. "And what are you still doing here, Naomi?" DeAndre sneered, gesturing at my laptop screen. "Still crunching numbers. You are just a glorified calculator, a sterile little accountant sitting in a massive house you never deserved. You should be packing your bags instead of staring at spreadsheets. Your time is up." I finally stopped typing. I closed my laptop with a soft click and looked up at DeAndre. I let my eyes trace the muddy footprints he had tracked through the foyer. I looked at the ruined white leather sofa. I watched Isabella rocking Leo near the staircase, looking at the crown molding with pure greed. I observed my parents struggling to carry boxes up the stairs to please a man actively robbing them of self-respect. I felt no anger. I felt no sorrow. I only felt a cold, clinical anticipation. In my line of work, you learn to let the criminals dig their own graves. The more comfortable they feel, the more mistakes they make. DeAndre thought he was intimidating me. He thought his aggressive posturing established dominance. He had absolutely no idea that every single word he spoke, every muddy step he took, and every piece of property he damaged was currently being recorded in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio by the very smart home system he had just mocked. "I am just wrapping up a final audit," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "I will stay in the guest room until my moving arrangements are finalized." DeAndre let out a loud, booming laugh, slapping his knee in triumph. "That is right. Keep your head down and stay out of our way. We run things now." I gave him a smile, picked up my laptop, and walked toward the guest hallway. Let him enjoy the couch. Let him enjoy the illusion of control. He was a parasite feeding on a corpse, unaware that the host was pure poison. I closed the guest room door, sat at the desk, and opened my laptop. My emotional performance was over. The real work was about to begin. 2 hours later, my throat felt dry. The guest room was quiet, but the muffled thuds from the master suite above me signaled that DeAndre and Isabella were busy claiming my personal space. I needed caffeine to fuel the forensic extraction I was about to execute on my laptop. I pushed my chair back and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. I moved silently, stepping lightly on the hardwood floors. When I entered the kitchen, I immediately went to the espresso machine. As the grinder purred to life, I heard the soft padding of bare feet behind me. I did not turn around. I knew exactly who it was. The heavy, cloying scent of Isabella floral perfume filled the air before she even spoke a single word. "Making yourself at home in my new kitchen, Naomi?" Isabella asked. Her voice was entirely devoid of the tragic, trembling sorrow she had performed so flawlessly at the funeral. It was sharp, arrogant, and dripping with pure malice. I poured the steaming espresso into my mug and finally turned to face her. Isabella leaned casually against the marble island. She was holding a crystal water glass from my premium collection. Her posture was relaxed, triumphant, and completely unguarded. The weeping widow act was fully deactivated. Now that DeAndre and our parents were upstairs unpacking boxes, she had no audience left to fool. She wanted to twist the knife. "You really thought you won the game, did you not?" Isabella sneered, taking a slow sip of her water. "You always thought you were so much better than me with your corporate job and your perfect little marriage. You looked down your nose at DeAndre and me. But look who is holding the keys to the castle now." I leaned against the counter, holding my warm mug with both hands. I let my silence stretch out, creating a vacuum that her massive ego simply had to fill. Isabella could never tolerate silence. She needed to boast. She needed to validate her own superiority by crushing me. "I have always taken whatever I wanted from you," she continued, her eyes gleaming with a sick, twisted delight. "Since we were kids, you were just the reliable little workhorse. Remember when we were teenagers and I ruined your prom dress just because I wanted the attention on me? Mom covered for me immediately. She blamed you for leaving it out. That was the dynamic, Naomi. That was always the dynamic." She set her glass down with a loud clank. She took a step closer, invading my space just like her husband had done earlier. "Remember 5 years ago?" Isabella asked, a cruel smile stretching across her face. "When I racked up $30,000 in credit card debt, you had just gotten your big promotion. Mom and Dad literally forced you to drain your savings to pay off my mistakes. They told you that family takes care of family. They made you write that check to save me from bankruptcy. And you did it like a good, obedient little dog. You worked 80-hour weeks to build your life, and I just snapped my fingers and took the cash." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The rich, dark flavor grounded me. Every single word spilling from her mouth was pure gold. The hidden security camera embedded in the crown molding above the refrigerator was capturing a high-definition video of her smug face. The invisible microphone inside the smart speaker on the counter was recording every syllable of her unhinged confession. "You never understood how this family works," Isabella gloated, pacing back and forth across the kitchen tiles. "Mom and Dad do not care about your bank accounts or your late nights at the office. They care about image. They care about charm. You were always just the ugly, hard-working draft. I was the masterpiece. They invested all their love and pride in me. You existed merely to fund my lifestyle." She stopped pacing and locked her eyes onto mine, hoping to see me shatter. She wanted tears. She wanted a screaming match. She wanted me to fall to pieces right there on the kitchen floor. "Even your husband knew it," Isabella whispered, lowering her voice into a lethal, venomous tone. "Liam saw the difference between us. He realized he married the boring draft when the masterpiece was standing right in front of him. That is why he came to my bed. That is why he gave me a son. You could never give him what he needed, Naomi. You are barren, you are empty, and now you are completely alone." The sheer level of delusion required to construct that fantasy was almost impressive. She actually believed her own lies. She had convinced herself that Liam, a man who despised her manipulative behavior and who was medically incapable of fathering a child, had somehow fallen madly in love with her. She was using a dead man reputation to excuse her own financial desperation and moral bankruptcy. I did not flinch. My expression remained a blank, unreadable slate. I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat. I looked at my younger sister. I looked at the masterpiece my parents had sacrificed everything to protect. She was nothing but a fragile house of cards, waiting for a strong gust of wind. "Are you even listening to me?" Isabella snapped, her frustration bubbling up when my tears failed to arrive. "Your life is over, Naomi. Pack your bags and get out of my house." "I hear you, Isabella," I said, my voice completely calm and level, loud and clear. I turned away from her, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen with her hollow victory. I walked back down the hallway toward the guest room, my coffee mug in my hands. The trap was set, and she had just eagerly handed me the very weapon I needed to destroy her. The morning sun broke through the guest room blinds, casting sharp geometric shadows across the floor. I had slept for exactly 4 hours. My mind was too busy processing the data extraction from Liam's secure servers to rest any longer. I needed to clear my head before diving into the next layer of financial encryption. I dressed, grabbed my keys, and drove to the organic grocery store nearby. The crisp Chicago morning air usually invigorated me, but today it felt heavy with the impending storm. I walked through the quiet aisles, picking up a few items I needed to sustain myself while isolated in the guest room. I bought fresh fruit and bottled water. I approached the checkout lane, handing my items to the young cashier. She scanned them with a polite smile and gave me the total. I reached into my designer wallet and pulled out the premium platinum credit card Liam and I shared for household expenses. I tapped it against the reader. The machine let out a sharp, aggressive beep. The screen flash declined. The cashier frowned and tried inserting the chip. Another sharp beep followed. I felt a sudden prickle of irritation. That account had a massive credit limit. I pulled out my secondary debit card. I swiped it. Declined. Contact your bank, the digital screen instructed me. The cashier looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and awkwardness. I am so sorry, ma'am, she said softly. Do you have another form of payment? I stared at the plastic cards in my hand. My forensic accountant instincts immediately mapped out the trajectory of what had just occurred. A sudden, complete freeze on multiple accounts across different banking institutions was not a random glitch. It was a highly coordinated lockout. I smiled politely at the cashier, told her I had forgotten to authorize a fraud alert, and left the groceries on the counter. I drove back to my house with my hands gripping the leather steering wheel. The pieces were locking into place. I pulled into the driveway and walked through the front door. The heavy oak slammed shut behind me, echoing loudly through the massive foyer. I walked straight into the kitchen. DeAndre was sitting on one of the imported leather bar stools, leaning heavily against the marble island. He held a crystal glass of my late husband, expensive scotch, swirling the amber liquid with a look of immense satisfaction. He had been waiting for me to return. He knew exactly where I had been, and exactly what had just happened. Having a rough morning, Naomi, DeAndre asked, his voice dripping with dark condescension. Card trouble at the checkout line. I stood a few feet away from him, my face an absolute blank mask. I crossed my arms and waited. His fragile ego required him to boast. He desperately needed me to know exactly how powerful he thought he was. It is funny how fast things can change. DeAndre laughed, taking a slow sip of the expensive scotch. One minute you think you are the rich, successful widow, and the next minute you cannot even buy an apple. I made a few phone calls this morning. You see, I have excellent banking connections in this city. A few words with the right estate managers and probate officials about a pending legal dispute over Liam assets, and suddenly, every joint account you share with your dead husband gets frozen solid. I tilted my head slightly, watching him closely. You illegally initiated a freeze on my financial accounts, I stated, keeping my tone purely observational. I am protecting my nephew, DeAndre countered, slamming his glass down hard on the marble countertop. I am making sure a greedy barren widow does not try stealing Leo inheritance before the ink on that will is even dry. You have been walking around here acting entirely too calm, Naomi. You think you can just ignore us and hide in the guest room while you plot how to drain Liam accounts. I shut that down. You have absolutely zero access to Liam cash. You are completely financially paralyzed. He stood up, towering over me, attempting to use his massive physical presence to intimidate me into submission. But physical intimidation only works on people who are actually afraid. DeAndre leaned in close enough for me to smell the stale alcohol on his breath. Let me make this incredibly simple for you, Naomi. You have until Friday at noon to sign that property deed over to Isabella and Leo. If you do not sign it, I am going to completely ruin your precious little corporate career. What makes you think you have any power over my career? I asked softly, giving him exactly the rope he needed. Because I know exactly who your clients are, DeAndre sneered. I know you audit major Fortune 500 companies. I know you rely on a pristine public reputation to get those massive contracts. If you fight us on this house, I will go straight to the press. I will contact your high-end corporate clients. I will leak stories to the media that you are a heartless monster actively trying to rob an orphaned baby of his rightful home. I will publicly paint you as a bitter, jealous ex-wife who is using her corporate wealth to crush a grieving mother and a helpless infant. Your clients will drop you instantly. Nobody hires an accountant who steals from babies. You will lose your firm. You will definitely be completely destroyed, Naomi. I let his threats hang heavy in the quiet air. He was brazenly blackmailing me. He was openly admitting to financial tampering and illegal extortion right underneath the invisible security camera that recorded every single angle of the kitchen. He thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought freezing the joint accounts would leave me desperate. He was unaware that my personal wealth was secured in encrypted private trusts he could not touch. Friday then. Friday then, I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. I allowed my shoulders to slump, draining the defiance from my posture. I widened my eyes, forcing a look of absolute panic. I took short gasps as if the walls were closing in. DeAndre stood tall, relishing the sight of my sudden fragility. I took a step back, trembling. Please, I choked out, forcing a tear to spill over my lashes. You cannot do this to me. You cannot take my home and business. I have worked my entire life for my career. If you go to the press, you will destroy everything I have built. Please, DeAndre. I sank to the floor, my knees hitting the marble tile with a loud thud. I buried my face in my hands, letting out a pathetic sob. The commotion drew an audience. My parents, Thomas and Catherine, hurried into the kitchen. Isabella followed closely behind them, carrying Leo. They stopped and stared at the scene unfolding on the floor. I looked up through a curtain of fake tears. I crawled toward my mother, reaching out to grasp the hem of her designer skirt. Mom, Dad, please help me. I pleaded, my voice breaking hysterically. Tell him to stop. They froze my bank accounts. They are threatening to ruin my accounting firm. This is my house. You know I bought this house. Please do not let them throw me out. I have nothing left. Liam is gone and they want to take my life. Catherine physically recoiled. She yanked her skirt out of my desperate grip and took a disgusted step backward as if my grief were a contagious disease. She looked down at me with pure revulsion. Stop this embarrassing display right now, Naomi. Catherine snapped, her tone dripping with contempt. You are making a fool of yourself. DeAndre is simply doing what is necessary to protect my grandson. You brought this upon yourself by being stubborn and greedy. Look at you groveling on the floor instead of accepting reality. You have a successful accounting career. Rent an apartment. Isabella has a baby to raise. Do the right thing and leave. Thomas crossed his arms, his face set in a stern scowl. He shook his head, looking at me as if I were a stranger who had trespassed into his life. Your mother is right, my father declared coldly. We warned you not to fight this. You chose to be difficult, and now you are facing the consequences. Isabella and DeAndre are a family now, and they need this space. You have until Friday to sign the transfer deed. Until then, go to your office, pack your belongings, and stay out of our way. We are done dealing with your tantrums. Isabella smirked, bouncing Leo gently on her hip. DeAndre laughed, a booming, triumphant sound that echoed off the ceilings. I kept my head bowed, letting out one final sob to complete the illusion. I slowly pushed myself off the floor, keeping my head down in a portrait of total defeat. I dragged my feet as I walked away, practically crawling down the hallway toward the home office Liam and I had shared. Behind me, I could hear the immediate shift in their demeanor. The tension evaporated. DeAndre clapped my father on the shoulder, congratulating him on handling the situation. Catherine began excitedly discussing which walls they should knock down to expand the nursery. Isabella happily chimed in about hiring an interior designer to erase every trace of my existence from the property. They truly believed they had won. They believed they had forced my surrender. They completely dropped their guard. I stepped into the home office and quietly closed the heavy mahogany door. I turned the brass lock until it clicked securely into place. The moment the lock engaged, the weeping broken widow vanished entirely. I wiped the stray tear from my cheek, my posture instantly straightening. My face settled back into a mask of cold, calculating precision. I grabbed a stack of empty cardboard boxes from the closet and began tossing random books and office supplies into them, creating enough noise to convince anyone outside that I was packing my life away. While my hands moved loudly, my mind was perfectly still. I walked over to the large built-in bookshelf covering the far wall. I reached behind a thick, leather-bound encyclopedia and pressed a concealed biometric scanner. The shelf clicked softly and slid open a fraction of an inch, revealing a hidden climate-controlled server rack. This was Liam's masterpiece. My husband had been a paranoid, brilliant cybersecurity expert who designed infrastructure for defense contractors. Our house was not just a home, it was a fortress. I pulled out my encrypted laptop and connected a physical cable directly into the master server node. I bypassed the standard commercial interface and accessed the deep-level administrative dashboard. A black screen filled with lines of green code illuminated my face. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in the complex sequences Liam had taught me years ago. I navigated to the surveillance directory and initiated the master override. I silently activated the invisible military-grade security cameras Liam had installed in every room. These were microscopic lenses embedded in smoke detectors, air vents, and lighting fixtures, equipped with facial recognition, motion tracking, and hypersensitive audio receivers. A grid of live video feeds instantly populated my screen. I could see DeAndre lounging in the living room, bragging about his extortion plans. I watched my parents nodding along, fully complicit in the theft of my estate. Every conversation, every illegal threat was now being captured in flawless high definition. I linked the local server to a secure offshore cloud backup. The progress bar hit 100%. The trap was operational. The walls of my home had eyes, and they were watching every move my enemies made. I smiled, taping a box shut with a satisfying rip. Friday was going to be an interesting day. I carried taped cardboard boxes out to my car, keeping my head bowed low as I walked past the living room. DeAndre was already sprawled across the sofa with his boots up, laughing at something on the television. Isabella was measuring the windows, ignoring me completely. My mother simply crossed her arms and watched me load the trunk, ensuring I was leaving. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without a single backward glance. They thought they had evicted me from my property. They had no idea they had locked themselves inside an inescapable surveillance cage. I drove straight into the heart of downtown Chicago. I checked into a premium suite at a luxury high-rise hotel, paying in cash using emergency funds I always kept secured in a private safety deposit box. The suite was immaculate, perched 40 floors above the bustling city streets, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the skyline. It was the perfect sterile command center for what I needed to do next. I locked the heavy hotel door, engaged the deadbolt, and dropped my bags on the plush carpet. The facade of the broken Weeping Widow vanished entirely the moment I stepped inside. I walked directly to the sleek mahogany desk in the corner of the suite and sat down. I pulled my encrypted laptop from my leather tote bag and opened it. The screen flared to life, illuminating the quiet room. I bypassed the standard login screen, running a secondary authentication protocol Liam had designed for me. A sequence of complex passwords and biometric scans granted me access to the deepest, most secure partition of my hard drive. This was where I stored our absolute truths, the highly sensitive documents that define the reality of our lives, far away from the prying eyes of my toxic family. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I navigated through a labyrinth of hidden folders. I opened a directory labeled with a seemingly random string of numbers. Inside rested a series of scanned medical documents from a top-tier fertility clinic. I clicked on the master file, and Liam Comprehensive Medical History populated the screen. I stared at the black and white text, feeling a profound surge of vindication wash over me. The report detailed a severe, irreversible genetic condition that Liam had been born with. The diagnosis was absolute and scientifically indisputable. My brilliant, wonderful husband was completely sterile. He possessed a 0 sperm count. It was a physical and biological impossibility for him to ever father a child naturally. We had discovered this devastating truth 5 years ago when we first tried to start a family. The news had crushed Liam. It struck a devastating blow to his pride and his sense of manhood. To protect his dignity, we made a solemn vow to keep his medical condition a complete secret. We never told my parents, we never told his colleagues, we certainly never told Isabella, who would have eagerly weaponized his infertility to mock our marriage. We absorbed the pain together in private, choosing to build a beautiful life, focused on our careers and each other. That closely guarded secret was now the ultimate weapon of mass destruction against my sister web of lies. I looked at the clinical diagnosis on the screen and let out a sharp, cold laugh. Leo absolutely cannot be Liam's son. Isabella had marched into my home, looked me dead in the eye, and claimed she had been sleeping with my husband to produce an heir. She had built an entire dramatic narrative around a miraculous pregnancy born from a forbidden affair. She had convinced my greedy parents that her child carried Liam bloodline, making him the rightful owner of a $1.8 million estate. It was all a spectacular, disgusting fabrication. Isabella was lying. She was lying to our parents, lying to her arrogant husband, and lying to the world. Whoever fathered her child, it definitely was not my husband. She had simply chosen Liam as the perfect wealthy target to exploit after his sudden death, assuming dead men tell no tales. She banked on my grief, keeping me too paralyzed to demand a paternity test. But as the initial wave of triumph subsided, my analytical mind caught on a glaring, jagged puzzle piece that did not fit. If Liam was completely sterile and the affair was a complete fiction, how did they get his signature on that fraudulent will? I leaned back in the ergonomic hotel chair, staring out at the darkening Chicago skyline. I mentally reconstructed the confrontation in my kitchen. The document DeAndre had slapped onto the marble counter was undeniably fake in its legal structure. The formatting was terrible, the wording was ridiculous, but that signature at the bottom was perfectly authentic. I had stared at it long enough to know it was not forged by a machine or traced by a steady hand. The ink flow, the pressure, the distinct slant of his letters, it was genuinely Liam handwriting. How did my sister and her parasitic husband obtain a blank piece of paper with my dead husband's authentic signature on it? Liam despised DeAndre and barely tolerated Isabella. He would never willingly sign a blank document and hand it to them. He was a cybersecurity executive obsessed with operational security and protocol. He shredded documents, he locked his hard drives, he trusted no one outside of me with his signature. My eyes narrowed as I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. They did not get that signature by accident. There was a missing link, a darker layer to this fraud that I had not yet uncovered. Isabella and DeAndre were desperate, but they were not criminal masterminds capable of infiltrating Liam's secure life. They had to have found a very specific and isolated opportunity to just quickly steal it away from him without detection. I opened a new terminal window on my laptop and began typing strings of command code. If DeAndre thought freezing my personal checking accounts would stop me, he was vastly underestimating what a forensic accountant actually does for a living. Retail banking is for amateurs. The real financial footprints are always buried deep within corporate ledgers and blockchain histories. I needed to understand the exact motive behind this elaborate charade. Isabella and her husband were exceptionally greedy, but forging a will to steal a house is a high-risk federal felony. They needed a catalyst, a massive urgent financial pressure to force their hand into committing such a reckless crime right after my husband died. I bypassed our locked personal accounts entirely. Instead, I accessed the secure portal for Liam's cybersecurity firm. As the company's original financial consultant, during its startup phase, I retained back-end administrative credentials that no one else knew about. I entered the encryption keys Liam and I had memorized. The corporate mainframe loaded onto my screen. I initiated a deep diagnostic scan of the company quarterly cash flows, cross-referencing every single vendor payment and outbound wire transfer authorized over the past 12 months. While the diagnostic algorithm processed millions of data points, I opened a second monitor. It was time to look into DeAndre. He constantly bragged online about his massive cryptocurrency gains, positioning himself as an elite digital asset investor. He frequently posted screenshots of his portfolio gains, and more importantly, his public wallet addresses to attract followers to his scam seminars. I scraped every public wallet hash he had ever posted. I fed those alphanumeric strings into a specialized blockchain analysis tool I used for federal fraud cases. The room was completely silent except for the rapid clicking of my keyboard. The city lights of Chicago glowed outside my hotel window, but my entire focus narrowed down to the scrolling green numbers reflecting on the glass. Tracking digital currency is often portrayed as impossible, but that is a myth. Every single transaction leaves a permanent, immutable scar on the digital ledger. you just have to know how to follow the blood trail. I watched as the blockchain tool mapped out DeAndre's financial ecosystem. His public wallets were mostly empty shells used for show, but one address had frequent interaction with a decentralized tumbling service, a mechanism used to obscure the origin of stolen or illicit funds. I locked onto that specific node. I deployed a tracking script to unravel the tumbled transactions, tracing the fragmented coins back to their original point of entry. It took nearly 3 hours of grueling high-stakes digital excavation. My eyes burned and my shoulders ached from tension. I drank cold coffee and kept typing, refusing to blink. Finally, the script broke through the final layer of obfuscation. The original source of DeAndre cryptocurrency was not a legitimate trading exchange. The funds had been transferred from a traditional fiat bank account located in the Cayman Islands. I pivoted back to my first monitor, where the corporate diagnostic scan had finished its comprehensive review of Liam Company ledgers. I filtered the results, isolating all outbound international wire transfers. I cross-referenced the Cayman Islands routing numbers my blockchain tool had just uncovered. A massive red flag instantly illuminated my screen. There it was, a glaring bleeding wound in the corporate financial architecture. Over the last 4 months, exactly $500,000 had been systematically siphoned out of Liam's cybersecurity firm. The money had been disguised as payments to a fictitious offshore software vendor. The routing numbers matched perfectly. The money flowed from Liam Company into the Cayman Islands shell account, then converted into digital currency, scrubbed through a tumbler, and deposited directly into DeAndre's secret crypto wallets. DeAndre was not a successful investor. He was a corporate parasite who had somehow gained access to the firm financial portal and embezzled $500,000. I stared at the irrefutable digital evidence glowing on my screen. The sheer magnitude of his crime was breathtaking. Wire fraud on this scale carried a mandatory federal prison sentence. My mind raced, connecting the final disparate pieces of this ugly puzzle. Liam was a brilliant security expert. He would not have missed a missing $500,000 for long. I pulled up the internal email server and searched for flagged administrative messages sent in the days leading up to his death. I found an encrypted draft saved in Liam Outbox, dated exactly 1 week before his sudden heart attack. It was addressed to the company legal department, demanding an immediate internal audit regarding unauthorized vendor payouts. Liam had discovered the theft. He knew the money was missing and he was preparing to initiate a full investigation. He just ran out of time. His heart gave out before he could officially hit send. And that was when DeAndre and Isabella realized they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. The moment the company executed an audit, the embezzlement would be instantly traced back to DeAndre. He would face federal charges and decades behind bars. They needed a massive distraction. They needed a way to legitimize a massive influx of sudden wealth, or somehow blame the missing funds on Liam himself to clear DeAndre's name. They fabricated the secret child. They forged the will to steal my $1.8 million estate, hoping to quickly liquidate the property to cover the stolen corporate funds before the auditors came knocking. It was a desperate, sloppy attempt to save themselves from federal prison. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath, analyzing the raw data. They had unknowingly handed me the exact weapons required to destroy them. The digital footprint was flawless and permanently recorded across multiple international servers, verifying their absolute guilt beyond any possible shadow of a doubt. The quiet hunt was officially over, and the ruthless execution phase had finally begun. My ultimate victory was now a mathematical certainty today. But mathematics requires complete proofs, and I needed to map every single variable of their desperate scheme before I struck. I opened Liam's calendar, cross-referencing the dates of the embezzlement with his personal schedule. I needed to know exactly how DeAndre had obtained that flawless signature on a blank piece of paper. Liam was a cybersecurity expert who shredded everything. He would never hand a signed blank page to a man he despised. The answer had to be hidden in the mundane details of his daily routine. My eyes scanned the logs from 3 weeks ago, right around the time Liam's internal system flagged the missing $500,000. I found a calendar entry for a Tuesday afternoon. A local courier service delivered a package to our home while I was at the office. I pulled up the smart home security archives from that specific date. I watched the high-definition footage of our front porch. It was not a random courier. It was DeAndre. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, holding a generic cardboard box. Liam opened the door looking confused and irritated. DeAndre handed him the box, claiming it was a misdelivered package belonging to my parents. Then DeAndre held out a clipboard with a digital tracking sheet, asking Liam to sign to confirm he received it. Liam, wanting to get DeAndre off his porch, quickly took the pen and signed. I zoomed in on the footage. DeAndre had cleverly folded the tracking sheet back, exposing only the bottom inch of a blank, heavy stock paper underneath. Liam was simply trying to close the door on an annoying relative. He had no idea he was providing his signature for a fraudulent will. DeAndre slipped the clipboard back into his jacket, smiled and walked away. The execution was clumsy, but effective. They had the signature. But the signature was just a tool. The true motive behind this entire circus was pure, unadulterated desperation. I opened a new window and ran a deep financial diagnostic on DeAndre's current cryptocurrency portfolio. He projected the image of a wealthy investment guru online, but the blockchain revealed a different reality. Over the past 3 months, DeAndre had leveraged the stolen $500,000 in high-risk margin trades. He had bet heavily on a volatile altcoin crash, and he had lost everything. His digital wallets were empty. He was broke, bleeding cash, and completely out of time. The pieces of their pathetic conspiracy snapped together with brutal clarity. This was never just about a greedy sister wanting my beautiful house. This was a frantic, terrifying race against the clock to avoid federal prison. Liam had discovered the missing $500,000 just days before his heart attack. He had drafted that email to his legal department demanding a full audit. DeAndre and Isabella knew the corporate investigation would inevitably lead straight to DeAndre's offshore shell accounts. They needed to replace the stolen funds immediately, but DeAndre had already vaporized the money in terrible investments. When Liam died suddenly, my sister and her husband saw a grotesque opportunity. They fabricated the secret child narrative to serve two desperate purposes. First, the fake affair provided a convenient scapegoat. If the company auditors came knocking, Isabella would claim Liam embezzled his own corporate funds to financially support his secret second family. She would paint my dead husband as a corrupt, cheating executive who stole from his own business to buy her silence. They intended to drag Liam's pristine reputation through the mud, to shield DeAndre from criminal liability. Second, the fake will was their literal get-out-of-jail-free card. By seizing my $1.8 million estate, they planned to quickly secure a massive equity bridge loan against the property. They would use that cash to quietly replace the missing $500,000 in the corporate accounts before the official audit uncovered the theft. The rest of the equity would fund their lavish lifestyle, leaving me homeless, bankrupt, and publicly humiliated. Isabella's gloating in my kitchen earlier today took on a completely new context. She was not just being cruel. She was sweating. The aggressive invasion of my home, the muddy shoes on the sofa, the freezing of my joint bank accounts, it was all a highly orchestrated intimidation tactic designed to force my immediate surrender. They needed me to sign over the property deed quickly because the corporate audit was looming. DeAndre's strict deadline of Friday at noon was not an arbitrary power play. I checked the corporate filing schedule on Liam's server. The company's comprehensive quarterly financial review was scheduled to begin on Monday morning. If DeAndre did not replace those funds by the end of the business week, the auditors would flag the missing money, and the FBI would be at his door by Tuesday. They were drowning, and they were trying to use my grief as a life raft. They assumed I was just a fragile, broken widow who would crumble under the threat of a public scandal. They assumed I would hand over my keys just to escape the shame of a fabricated affair. I sat back in my hotel chair, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. They had underestimated me on every conceivable level. They thought they were playing a simple game of family bullying, unaware they had just challenged a forensic accountant to a war of financial attrition. Every move they made was documented. Every lie they told was recorded. I securely backed up the surveillance footage of DeAndre stealing the signature, the offshore routing numbers, and the collapsed crypto margin trades. The Friday deadline was rapidly approaching. I had exactly 3 days to orchestrate a flawless public execution that would protect my assets and completely obliterate their miserable lives. I closed the lid of my laptop. My grieving period was officially postponed. It was time to hunt them down and burn their pathetic criminal empire to the ground completely. I woke up feeling incredibly sharp. The fog of grief was entirely replaced by a drive to dismantle the parasites occupying my home. I opened my laptop, connecting back to the hidden server in my house. The surveillance grid loaded instantly, displaying video feeds from every room. DeAndre was pacing in the kitchen, talking furiously on his cell phone, while Isabella lounged in my master suite. My personal phone buzzed on the desk. A notification appeared. Isabella was going live on Instagram. I pulled up a recording application on my laptop to capture the broadcast directly. I needed every second of this performance saved to my hard drive. Isabella's face filled the screen. Her makeup was applied flawlessly to mimic someone who had been crying for days. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, projecting an image of an exhausted mother. She sat directly on my custom bed in the master bedroom. Leo was propped up next to her, clutching a stuffed animal. "Thank you for joining the stream," Isabella began, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "I did not want to do this publicly, but my family faces an absolute nightmare. We laid Liam to rest yesterday. It was a tragedy. But what we are dealing with now is a level of cruelty I cannot even begin to comprehend." She paused, sniffing for the camera. DeAndre stepped into the frame, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. He looked into the lens, wearing a solemn, troubled expression. "My sister Naomi is trying to destroy us," Isabella continued, letting a tear fall down her cheek. "Liam wanted his biological son taken care of. He signed a legal will, leaving this house to Leo. But Naomi is refusing to honor his dying wishes. She is a wealthy accountant, but she is using her power to throw a grieving mother and an orphaned baby out onto the street." DeAndre shook his head, letting out a heavy stage sigh. "We just want peace," DeAndre added, his deep voice echoing through the bedroom. "We want to mourn our family member and raise this boy the way his father wanted. But Naomi froze our bank accounts. She locked us out of our own resources. She is an evil corporate monster acting out of pure jealousy because she was barren and could not give Liam the family he desperately wanted. She is actively trying to leave this helpless infant completely homeless." I sat in my hotel suite watching them desecrate my husband's memory and weaponize my medical trauma for social media clout. I felt absolutely nothing but clinical satisfaction. They were sealing their own fate. Every defamatory word broadcasted to their thousands of followers was an actionable offense. I checked the screen recording software, ensuring the audio levels were capturing their slander perfectly. The bedroom door on the live stream swung open, and my parents walked into the frame. Catherine and Thomas positioned themselves behind Isabella and DeAndre, forming a unified front of moral outrage. My mother placed a comforting hand on Isabella's shoulder, staring into the camera with an expression of profound disappointment. "We never thought we would have to speak against our own flesh and blood," Catherine announced, her voice dripping with pious indignation. "We raised Naomi to be a kind, loving person, but the corporate world poisoned her. She became obsessed with money and status. We have watched her treat her sister terribly for years, but we never imagined she could be this heartless. Trying to steal a home from an innocent baby is an act of pure evil." Thomas stepped forward, crossing his arms and puffing out his chest. He looked straight into the lens, trying to project the image of a strong, righteous patriarch defending his family from a greedy tyrant. "We cannot support a monster," Thomas declared firmly. "We gave Naomi every opportunity in life, and she repaid us with unimaginable cruelty. She refuses to accept Liam's choices, and she refuses to accept this beautiful child. As of today, we are publicly severing all ties with Naomi. We completely disown her. She is no longer a part of this family. We stand with Isabella, DeAndre, and our grandson Leo. We will fight for this boy's rights no matter what it takes. Isabella buried her face in DeAndre's shoulder, sobbing loudly into the fabric of his shirt. The comments on the live stream were exploding. Hundreds of viewers were flooding the chat with messages of support for Isabella and absolute hatred for me. They called me a soulless corporate witch, a greedy sociopath, and a barren villain who deserved to rot. The public narrative had been successfully hijacked. Isabella and DeAndre had painted themselves as the ultimate victims of my supposed corporate greed. I reached out and ended the screen recording, saving the massive video file directly to my secure local drive. My parents had just publicly disowned me in front of thousands of people. They had gleefully participated in a massive smear campaign designed to destroy my professional and personal reputation, all to protect a daughter who was actively committing federal wire fraud. They believed this public pressure would force my total surrender. They assumed the overwhelming social media backlash would terrify me into signing away the property deed just to make the nightmare stop. They were incredibly foolish. I took a sip of my black coffee, relishing the bitter taste. They had just provided me with ironclad evidence of public defamation and character assassination. This video would guarantee massive punitive damages in civil court once the criminal trials concluded. I closed the media player and opened my encrypted email portal. The social media circus was irrelevant noise compared to the financial execution I was currently preparing. I needed to move fast before DeAndre realized his offshore accounts were being monitored. I drafted an urgent message to my legal counsel, attaching the newly acquired surveillance files and the blockchain tracking reports. The trap was fully loaded. Now it was time. My phone on the mahogany desk began to vibrate intensely. It was a continuous buzzing signaling the immediate fallout of Isabella and DeAndre's highly orchestrated social media performance. I picked up the device and watched the screen light up with an endless cascade of notifications. The smear campaign breached their digital echo chamber and was now actively invading my personal life. Messages from extended family poured in. Aunt Diane sent a scathing text calling me an absolute disgrace to the family name. She accused me of dishonoring Liam's memory, demanding I surrender the property immediately. Cousin Greg left a furious voicemail screaming that I was a bitter, infertile monster who deserved to be alone. He threatened to physically drag me out if I did not hand over the keys. They completely swallowed the lie. None bothered to call me for my side of the story. None questioned the sudden appearance of a secret 1-year-old son. They digested the toxic narrative my parents endorsed and lined up to execute my character publicly. The vitriol extended beyond blood relatives. Strangers who followed Isabella online tracked down my personal social media profiles. Direct messages flooded my inbox filled with graphic threats and appalling insults. Anonymous users called me a corporate parasite, a gold digger, and a barren witch. Some suggested I should be thrown in prison for stealing from an orphaned infant. The sheer volume of hatred demonstrated exactly how effectively my sister had weaponized internet outrage. She successfully mobilized an angry mob of digital vigilantes, directing their collective fury straight at my head. They were convinced they were fighting for justice, unaware they were acting as attack dogs for desperate felons. Amidst the hostility, a few distinct messages pierced the noise. My work phone chimed, alerting me to incoming communications from professional allies. David, a senior audit manager, texted asking if I was safe. He noted the firm public relations department was monitoring the situation, advising me to keep my head down. Rachel, the managing partner, sent a supportive email reminding me my corporate reputation was built on flawless integrity, not internet gossip. She assured me the firm stood by my side until actual facts were verified. Their calm professional concern provided a stark contrast to the hysterical mob mentality of my family. I quickly replied to both, assuring them the situation was under my control and advising them to ignore the noise. I set the phone down, leaning back in my desk chair. Any normal person enduring this level of coordinated public destruction would be completely broken. A typical grieving widow facing the sudden loss of her husband, the terrifying betrayal of her sister, and the vicious disownment by her parents would collapse under the crushing weight of the trauma. She would cry hysterically, beg for mercy, and sign away her entire livelihood just to make the screaming stop. But I did not break. Instead, I smiled. A slow, cold smile stretched across my face as I watched the notification counter on my phone climb higher. I felt an incredible surge of power coursing through my veins. Every single hateful message, every threatening voicemail, and every vicious comment left on my profiles was another nail violently hammered into their collective coffin. They thought this digital assault was their ultimate victory. They believed they were systematically dismantling my life, destroying my social standing, and forcing my total surrender. They failed to realize they were simply providing me with a mountain of actionable evidence. I opened a specialized forensic archiving program on my laptop. I synced my phone to the software and initiated an automated scraping protocol. The program began systematically downloading every single text message, voicemail, and direct message, logging the exact timestamps and sender identities. I captured the sprawling comment threads from Isabella broadcast, archiving the thousands of defamatory statements incited by her lies. I documented the explicit threats from my extended family members, establishing a clear record of targeted harassment. My parents' public disownment on that livestream was the final crucial component of my legal strategy. By actively participating in the broadcast, Thomas and Catherine had elevated themselves from passive enablers to willing co-conspirators in a massive campaign of public defamation. They had eagerly stepped into the crosshairs. When the dust finally settled and the federal indictments were handed down, I would unleash a devastating civil lawsuit against all of them. I would sue them for character defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and targeted harassment. The financial penalties would be catastrophic. They believed my lack of public response indicated weakness. They thought my silence meant I was hiding in shame, terrified of their manufactured scandal. They had no idea my silence was actually the quiet, focused discipline of a predator patiently stalking its prey. I was meticulously building a flawless legal enclosure around them, fortifying the steel bars with their own reckless words. DeAndre was so consumed by his desperate need to cover up his $500,000 embezzlement that he blinded himself to the legal exposure he was creating. Isabella was so addicted to the attention and the tragic victim narrative that she forgot she was committing an egregious fraud. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the hotel minibar and took a refreshing sip. The Friday deadline DeAndre had arrogantly mandated was looming closer. He expected me to arrive at the house broken and defeated, holding a pen, and ready to sign away my $1.8 million property. I planned to give him exactly what he asked for. I would show up at the house, I would bring documents. But the papers I planned to drop on that kitchen island would not surrender my home. They would detonate a nuclear explosion right in the middle of their celebration. I checked the secure server feed one last time, verifying the internal cameras were still capturing their every move. The trap was perfectly set and fully ready for Friday. I grabbed my cashmere coat and left the hotel room early Thursday morning. The cold wind whipped off the lake as I walked 2 blocks to the imposing glass-walled skyscraper towering over the financial district. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. The doors slid open to reveal the reception area of the most ruthless litigation firm in the city. I was here to meet Harrison, a senior partner known for dismantling corporate fraudsters with surgical precision. Liam and I had kept his firm on retainer for extreme emergencies. This certainly qualified as an absolute disaster requiring his specific set of skills. Harrison met me at his door. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and possessed an intimidating expression. He ushered me inside his massive corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the urban sprawl below. We sat at his expansive, polished mahogany conference table. He poured 2 cups of black coffee and leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I watched the live stream your sister broadcasted yesterday," Harrison stated calmly. "It was quite the performance. My team is already drafting the defamation suit. But you mentioned on the phone that you have something far more substantial than a civil complaint." "I have the kill shot," I replied, keeping my voice completely steady. I pulled my encrypted laptop from my bag and connected it to the large monitor mounted on his wall. I opened the first secure folder. I projected Liam's official medical records onto the screen. Harrison adjusted his glasses and read the clinical diagnosis, detailing my late husband, complete sterility. Liam possessed a zero sperm count. I explained, watching Harrison's eyes widen slightly at the revelation. He was born with a severe genetic condition. It is biologically impossible for him to be the father of Isabella's child. Her entire narrative is a grotesque fabrication designed to steal my $1.8 million estate. This alone destroys the fake will and opens her up to massive fraud charges. Harrison noted a sharp predator smile forming on his face. But why forge a will for a house? It is a high-risk crime with a heavy paper trail. Because they are desperate, I said, and they are rapidly running out of time. I opened the second folder and projected the complex financial flowcharts I had built during my all-night forensic audit. I walked Harrison through the breadcrumbs. I showed him the $500,000 siphoned out of Liam's cybersecurity firm, disguised as offshore vendor payments. I traced the routing numbers to the Cayman Islands shell account. I showed him the cryptocurrency Tumblr logs and the final deposit destinations inside DeAndre public digital wallets. Finally, I displayed the margin call records proving DeAndre had completely vaporized the stolen funds in terrible crypto investments over the last 3 months. Liam discovered the missing $500,000 just days before his heart attack. I continued, pointing to the drafted email I had recovered from the company server. He was preparing to trigger a massive internal audit. DeAndre knew he would be exposed. When Liam died suddenly, they forged the fake will to steal my house. They planned to take out a massive equity loan against my property to replace the stolen corporate funds before the upcoming Monday financial review. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, letting out a low whistle. Wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, forgery, attempted extortion. This is not just a family dispute, Naomi. This is a massive federal crime. DeAndre is looking at a mandatory prison sentence. I am not finished, I said, tapping the keyboard. I opened the third folder containing the high-definition security footage from my home. I played the video of DeAndre tricking Liam into signing the blank tracking sheet hidden on the clipboard. Then I played the audio recording of Isabella standing in my kitchen, openly bragging about how she had always taken my money and manipulating my parents. Lastly, I showed him the footage of DeAndre threatening to destroy my corporate career if I did not sign the property deed over by Friday noon. Harrison watched the undeniable evidence of their extortion and criminal conspiracy. He closed his notebook and looked at me with profound respect. You handed them enough rope to hang themselves, and they eagerly built their own gallows. I want them completely destroyed, Harrison, I stated coldly. I want no mercy shown. They used my husband's death as a cover for a federal crime and weaponized my parents against me. I want the maximum legal retaliation your firm can provide. Harrison picked up his secure desk phone. I have a direct contact at the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. Given the clear evidence of interstate wire fraud and corporate embezzlement, they will be extremely interested in DeAndre offshore transactions. We will coordinate our efforts to ensure maximum impact. He dialed the number and spoke in low, rapid tones to the federal agent on the other end of the line. He transmitted my encrypted data packets directly to their secure server. I sat perfectly still, sipping the hot black coffee, watching the legal machinery grind into motion. The trap I had carefully designed was now backed by the full power of the federal government. Harrison hung up and looked directly at me. The FBI is reviewing the financial logs right now. They are accelerating the warrant process based on the flight risk associated with the offshore accounts. The raid will be fully authorized by tomorrow morning. DeAndre demanded I bring the deed to the house by tomorrow evening, I said. They are throwing a massive party to celebrate their fake victory. Then we give them a show, Harrison said firmly. You will walk in there tomorrow night. You will hand them the legal reality, and the authorities will handle the rest. It is going to be an absolute legal blitzkrieg. I left Harrison's office with a clear timeline and a sense of absolute purpose. The federal agents were coordinating with local authorities. The trap was primed. Now I needed to make sure the rats were comfortably gathered exactly where the exterminators expected them to be. I walked the 2 blocks back to my luxury hotel suite, letting the crisp Chicago wind hit my face. My mind was sharp-focused purely on the execution of our strategy. The FBI had the financial logs. Harrison had the defamation filings ready to launch. All that remained was my final performance. I walked into my room and picked up my cell phone. I needed to ensure they dropped all remaining defenses and gathered in one room. I opened the family group chat. It had been mostly silent since my parents publicly disowned me on their live stream, save for a few demanding texts from DeAndre reminding me the clock was ticking. I sat on the edge of the plush hotel bed, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. I needed to force my voice to waver and crack. I had to sound utterly exhausted, broken, and completely defeated by their relentless pressure. I pressed the record icon and held the phone close to my mouth. I let a pathetic manufactured sob catch in my throat. "You win," I said, my voice trembling perfectly. "I am completely exhausted. I cannot fight my own family anymore. The public pressure is destroying my life and my career. I will bring the transfer papers to the house tonight at 8. Have your pens ready. I just want this nightmare to end." I released the button and sent the audio file into the digital void. I watched the screen intently. The little delivery checkmarks turned blue almost instantly. They were hovering over their phones, actively waiting for my surrender. The responses flooded the chat within seconds, validating my assessment of their incredible arrogance. DeAndre did not even bother typing actual words. He replied with a single champagne bottle emoji. It was a disgusting digital toast to his successful extortion and federal wire fraud. He genuinely thought he had secured the funds to replace his embezzled money. My mother, Catherine, sent her response a moment later. "Finally, you are acting like an adult," she typed, her words dripping with maternal condescension. "We expect you to be prompt, Naomi. No more childish drama." My father, Thomas, followed her message with a simple thumbs-up emoji, sealing his complicity. Isabella sent absolutely nothing. She was likely too busy dancing around my living room, celebrating her stolen victory, and calculating how to spend the equity loan they planned to take out against my property. I tossed the cell phone onto the desk with a sharp thud. The pathetic weeping widow persona was gone forever. It had served its purpose perfectly. They had swallowed the bait without a single moment of hesitation. They were completely blinded by their own greed and superiority. It was time to prepare for the final confrontation. I walked over to the hotel closet, where I had hung the specific outfit I purchased exclusively for this night. I was not going to walk into my own home looking like a defeated victim begging for mercy. I was going to project absolute power and unyielding authority. I dressed in my sharpest, most intimidating designer suit. It was a tailored charcoal gray ensemble with rigid architectural lines and an aggressive silhouette. I paired it with a deep crimson silk blouse that felt like wearing armor. I applied my makeup with meticulous precision, emphasizing sharp cheekbones and cold, dark eyes. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight style that left no room for softness. I slipped on a pair of sleek black stiletto heels that would sound like a gavel hitting a block with every step I took. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, evaluating the woman reflecting back at me. The terrified, grieving wife, who had cowered in the kitchen just a few days ago, was completely eradicated. In her place stood a ruthless forensic accountant who had meticulously engineered the total destruction of her toxic family. I picked up the thick manila folder containing the genuine property deed and Liam official medical records. This folder was the explosive device that would vaporize their entire criminal conspiracy. I was stepping directly into a hostile war zone, but I was no longer the prey. I was going to a slaughter, and I was the butcher. Every single piece of their fragile, arrogant criminal empire was about to be obliterated by the very person they thought they could so easily crush under their feet. I placed the heavy manila folder into my leather briefcase. I grabbed my car keys and walked out of the hotel suite, locking the door firmly behind me. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt incredibly slow, but my pulse remained perfectly steady. I climbed into my car and started the engine, feeling the hum vibrate through the steering wheel. The drive across Chicago gave me time to review every step of the tactical sequence. Harrison confirmed the federal agents were staged nearby and eagerly waiting for my signal. DeAndre was anticipating a quiet and shameful surrender. Isabella was expecting to do a formal victory lap. My parents were expecting to witness my ultimate humiliation. They were entirely unprepared for the sheer violence of the legal reality I was bringing straight to their doorstep. I navigated through the affluent suburban streets, steadily approaching the familiar high iron gates of my neighborhood. I pulled up to the curb outside my $1.8 million estate, right on schedule. The massive house was brightly illuminated against the darkening evening sky, falsely projecting an image of a happy family gathering. I turned off the engine and gripped the handle of my briefcase. The meticulous preparation was entirely complete. The execution was now about to begin. I stepped out of my vehicle and walked briskly up the paved driveway. The heavy oak front door was completely unlocked, an arrogant oversight by people who felt utterly invincible. I pushed the door open and the immediate sounds of a vibrant, boisterous celebration hit me like a physical wave. Loud music pulsed rhythmically through the smart home audio speakers Liam had painstakingly wired and installed himself. The rich, savory aroma of expensive catered food filled the grand foyer. I walked slowly down the long corridor, the sharp, deliberate click of my black stiletto heels entirely masked by the heavy bass of the music echoing around me. I paused silently at the edge of the expansive living room, taking a moment to fully absorb the grotesque scene unfolding right inside my own house. They had transformed my elegant, peaceful sanctuary into a tacky, triumphant victory party. My father Thomas sat comfortably in Liam's favorite vintage leather armchair, laughing loudly with his head thrown back at something my mother Catherine had just said. Catherine was leaning casually against the massive marble kitchen island, holding a delicate crystal wine glass. I immediately recognized the deep red liquid swirling inside her glass. It was a very rare, highly exclusive vintage, a specific $500 bottle of Cabernet that Liam and I had purchased during a romantic trip to Napa Valley. We had been saving that exact bottle for our 10th wedding anniversary. My parents had popped the cork without a single second of hesitation, casually treating my most deeply treasured memories like cheap disposable party favors. DeAndre stood right next to my mother, holding his own overflowing glass, wearing a massive, arrogant smirk that stretched widely across his face. And then I saw Isabella. My younger sister was happily twirling around the center of the kitchen, holding little Leo in her arms, acting exactly like the newly crowned lady of the manor. But it was not her arrogant dancing that caught my attention. It was the sparkling object she wore proudly around her neck that made the blood in my veins run absolutely cold. Resting perfectly against her collarbone was the delicate custom diamond pendant Liam had given me on our 5th wedding anniversary. Isabella had actually invaded my private master bedroom, rummaged through my personal velvet-lined jewelry box, and deliberately draped my most intimate sentimental possession around her own neck. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect was staggering, yet it only fueled the icy, calculated focus driving my every move. Isabella noticed me standing in the doorway first. Her loud, joyful laughter abruptly stopped and she froze completely, her hand instinctively moving up to touch the diamond necklace resting on her chest. DeAndre noticed her sudden silence and tapped a button on his smartphone, instantly killing the loud music pulsing through the house. The entire room turned simultaneously to face me. The warm, celebratory atmosphere shifted instantly into a tense, heavily hostile standoff. Thomas set his expensive glass down on the side table, his face immediately hardening into his familiar patriarchal scowl of deep disapproval. Catherine crossed her arms tightly over her chest, looking me up and down with obvious unfiltered disgust. They fully expected me to walk in looking completely ruined. They anticipated swollen red eyes, trembling hands, stained clothes, and a shattered, defeated posture. Instead, my family saw a woman clad in sharp, immaculate designer armor, standing perfectly straight, radiating cold, unyielding authority. The charcoal gray suit I wore projected absolute power, and my expression gave away absolutely nothing. My mother frowned, clearly unnerved by my composed appearance, but DeAndre was far too blinded by his own massive, inflated ego to recognize the lethal danger standing right in front of him. He believed his ruthless extortion had worked perfectly. He believed he had successfully terrified me into giving up everything I owned. He eagerly stepped forward, taking aggressive charge of the quiet room, ready to deliver his final crushing blow. DeAndre walked slowly over to the center of the marble kitchen island and picked up a thick stack of legally binding papers. He slapped them down onto the hard countertop with a loud, aggressive, echoing thud. He arrogantly adjusted his heavy gold chain and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated condescension. In his mind, he had completely won the war. He genuinely thought he had successfully stolen my beautiful house, permanently covered up his massive corporate embezzlement, and secured a luxurious, worry-free lifestyle for himself and his entirely compliant wife. He viewed me as nothing more than a minor annoying obstacle that he had successfully bullied into total submission. DeAndre haughtily slid the property transfer deed across the smooth surface of the kitchen island. The thick stack of paper stopped moving, right at the edge, hovering just mere inches from my fingertips. He reached deep into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket, pulled out a heavy silver pen, and tossed it carelessly straight at my chest. The metal pen bounced harmlessly off the lapel of my designer jacket and clattered loudly onto the pristine hardwood floor, rolling a few inches before coming to a complete stop near the tip of my stiletto heel. To prolong his moment of dominance, he deliberately adjusted his expensive gold watch. A watch I immediately recognized as another item purchased with funds stolen from my late husband. My parents stood completely still behind him, eagerly waiting for me to break down and accept my designated role as the ultimate loser in their twisted game. The air in the room grew heavy and suffocating, but I did not break my unyielding stare. I simply looked down at the pen resting on the floor. "Sign it, and we might let you visit Leo on holidays." He mocked a cruel, victorious smile, twisting his face as he waited for my final surrender. I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me. The absolute legal slaughter was finally ready to begin right now. I did not even glance at the heavy silver pen resting near the toe of my black stiletto heel. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, maintaining direct, unyielding eye contact with DeAndre. The smug, victorious expression plastered across his face began to falter just a fraction of an inch as my silence stretched out. He expected me to scramble to pick up the pen and weep over the documents. He expected capitulation. Instead, I slowly unclasped the brushed metal latch of my leather briefcase. The sharp mechanical click echoed loudly in the tense atmosphere of the kitchen. My mother let out an impatient sigh, crossing her arms tighter across her chest. Thomas frowned, leaning forward slightly in the vintage armchair. Isabella stopped bouncing, Leo shifting her weight nervously from one foot to the other. She reached up again to touch the stolen diamond pendant resting against her collarbone. DeAndre shifted his stance, attempting to project dominance, but his eyes darted toward the briefcase I had just opened. I reached inside the dark leather compartment and pulled out the thick manila folder I had prepared with Harrison. I placed it onto the marble island, right next to the fraudulent transfer deed DeAndre had so arrogantly presented. I did not rush. I let the visual weight of the folder settle into the room. I flipped open the heavy cover, revealing a stack of perfectly crisp legal documents stamped with official blue county seals and notarized watermarks. "I cannot sign that, DeAndre. You see, Liam's name was never on this house." The words hung in the air, suspended in the sudden suffocating quiet. DeAndre blinked, his brow furrowing as his brain struggled to process the sentence. Isabella let out a sharp scoff, shaking her head in denial. Catherine rolled her eyes, clearly thinking this was just another pathetic attempt to delay the inevitable. Thomas stood up from the armchair, taking 2 steps toward the kitchen island. "What kind of nonsense are you talking about, Naomi?" my father demanded, his voice thick with irritation. "You and Liam bought this estate together. It was your marital home. His will clearly dictates that his half of the property goes to his biological son. Stop playing these ridiculous games and sign the transfer." I ignored my father completely, keeping my gaze locked onto DeAndre. I reached into the manila folder and pulled out the very first document. It was the original certified master deed to the $1.8 million property. I slid the heavy paper across the smooth marble countertop, pushing it directly over DeAndre's fake transfer papers. I tapped my index finger against the bold printed text at the top of the page. "Read it," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Read the owner of record." DeAndre leaned forward, his eyes scanning the document. He expected to see my name and Liam's name listed as joint tenants. Instead, his eyes snagged on a string of unfamiliar corporate text. I watched his pupils dart back and forth, reading the sentence again and again as if the words might magically change. This house is legally owned by a private, anonymous, limited liability company. I explained clearly, projecting my voice so Isabella and my parents could hear every single syllable. An LLC that I established 7 years ago using my own personal assets. I am the sole managing member and the exclusive owner of that corporate entity. Liam did not contribute a single penny to the purchase of this property. His name has never appeared on the deed, the mortgage, or the municipal tax records. He was legally speaking nothing more than a tenant living in a house owned entirely by my holding company. The color began to rapidly drain from DeAndre's face. The aggressive, confident posture he had maintained all evening suddenly collapsed. His broad shoulders slumped and his mouth opened slightly. The profound legal reality of my words was crashing down on his head like a concrete block. "Do you understand what that means, DeAndre?" I asked, leaning forward slightly across the marble island. "It means your carefully crafted masterpiece is mathematically impossible. A man cannot legally bequeath an asset he does not own. Liam had absolutely no legal authority to leave this house to anyone because it was never his property to give away. Therefore, the will you produced at the funeral, the document you so proudly claimed was his final dying wish, is an undeniable, irrefutable forgery. It is a fabricated piece of garbage." "That is impossible!" Isabella shrieked, clutching Leo tighter against her chest. "You are lying! You are just trying to steal my son's inheritance. The county clerk does not lie." "Isabella," I replied coldly, without taking my eyes off her husband. "And neither does the federal government. By presenting a forged will to seize assets you do not own, you just committed felony fraud. By attempting to force me to sign away my corporate property using blackmail and public defamation, you just committed criminal extortion. You handed me the exact physical proof I needed to put you behind bars. You wrote a fake will giving away a house that Liam did not own. You are a complete fool." DeAndre stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the stainless refrigerator. His chest heaved as panic finally set in. He looked down at his expensive watch, the watch he bought with stolen money, then looked wildly toward the front door. He realized the Friday deadline he had pushed so hard to enforce had just become his own execution date. The trap had slammed shut. He was standing in a house he could not steal, holding a forged document that guaranteed his imprisonment, facing a woman he had completely underestimated. The victory party was entirely over. The relentless slaughter I had meticulously orchestrated was finally commencing. DeAndre was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his disastrous miscalculation, unable to speak a single word. Before the suffocating reality of the property deed could fully settle into their panicked minds, I reached back into the thick manila folder. I was not going to give them a single second to catch their breath or formulate a new lie. DeAndre remained frozen against the stainless refrigerator, his chest heaving with silent, frantic breaths. Isabella opened her mouth, her perfectly glossed lips trembling as she desperately searched for a way to spin this disaster back into her favor. She likely planned to claim Liam had verbally promised her the estate regardless of the paperwork. She never got the chance to speak. I pulled out a second stack of papers stapled at the top left corner and slammed it down onto the marble island right next to the deed. The sharp smack of the paper hitting the stone echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. This document bore the distinct, highly recognizable letterhead of the most exclusive fertility clinic in the entire state of Illinois. The clinical logo sat proudly above several pages of dense medical terminology and laboratory results. My mother, Catherine, took a hesitant step forward, her eyes darting nervously toward the clinic logo. My father, Thomas, stood completely rigid, his patriarchal authority rapidly evaporating into pure confusion. They had no idea what they were looking at. They only knew that my calm, ruthless demeanor signaled absolute destruction. I looked directly at my sister. Isabella was clutching Leo so tightly, the toddler began to squirm and fuss in her arms. The stolen diamond pendant resting against her collarbone caught the light from the kitchen chandelier, mocking her current state of absolute terror. I kept my voice deliberately low, forcing them all to lean in and listen to their own ruin. When Liam and I first started trying to build our family, 5 years ago, we hit a roadblock. I explained, my tone completely devoid of the grief they expected to hear. We went to the best specialists in Chicago to figure out why we were struggling. Liam underwent a massive battery of genetic tests and physical examinations. We kept the results a total secret because it was incredibly painful for him to process. We wanted to protect his privacy and his pride from a family that constantly judges everyone based on superficial appearances. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the top page of the medical file. This is Liam's official medical record. It contains a comprehensive diagnosis confirmed by 3 independent board-certified specialists. Liam was born with a severe, irreversible genetic condition. He possessed an absolute 0 sperm count. My husband was 100% sterile from the day he was born until the day he died. It was biologically, medically, and physically impossible for him to ever father a child naturally. The silence that engulfed the living room was absolute. It was a heavy, crushing vacuum that sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the air. Catherine let out a strange, strangled gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Thomas swayed slightly on his feet, his eyes wide with horrified realization. The golden image of their perfect daughter, the masterpiece they had sacrificed everything to protect, was shattering into a million ugly pieces right in front of them. I turned my lethal focus entirely onto Isabella. The smug, arrogant woman who had paraded around my kitchen just minutes ago was completely gone. Her face was chalk white, drained of all color. Her eyes were wide with a frantic, trapped panic. She looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had just snapped completely shut. My husband was sterile. I stated the words cutting through the air like a serrated blade. So Isabella, who did you sleep with to get pregnant? Or did DeAndre know he was raising another man-bastard this whole time? The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Isabella let out a piercing, hysterical scream. It was not the fake, delicate crying she had performed so flawlessly at the funeral. It was a raw, guttural shriek of a narcissist whose entire reality had just been violently dismantled. She stumbled backward, almost dropping Leo, who immediately began wailing in terror at the sudden, chaotic noise. She shook her head wildly, denying the undeniable truth staring her right in the face. DeAndre reacted with murderous rage. His head snapped toward his wife, his eyes bulging with a terrifying mixture of shock and violent anger. The realization hit him with the force of a moving train. He had constructed this massive, highly illegal extortion plot, assuming Isabella had actually slept with the wealthy tech executive. He thought he was using Liam's illegitimate child as a shield to cover up his own corporate embezzlement. Now he was staring at the terrifying reality that his wife was a pathological liar, who had potentially cheated on him with some random stranger from a local bar. The child he was using as a prop for his massive fraud was entirely useless. The fake will was useless. His entire criminal conspiracy was built on a biological impossibility. He lunged forward, his large hands clenching into tight fists, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. He looked ready to tear Isabella apart right there in the middle of my kitchen. Thomas and Catherine were completely paralyzed with shock. The revelation was too massive, too disgusting for their status, obsessed minds to compute. Their precious, perfect daughter was not a tragic victim of a forbidden romance with a wealthy executive. She was a reckless liar who had tried to steal a $1.8 million estate using a fake child and a forged document. The pristine family reputation they valued above all else was completely destroyed. I stood perfectly still, watching the glorious, violent collapse of their entire world. They had tried to break me to steal my home and ruin my career. Now they were tearing each other to pieces. Section 18 label. Word count exactly 1,000 words. DeAndre let out a guttural roar that shook the glass fixtures above the kitchen island. Realizing his entire criminal enterprise was built on his wife's infidelity completely shattered his arrogant facade. If he could destroy the medical records and the property deed, he foolishly believed he could still salvage his extortion plot. He lunged across the wide kitchen island. His massive hands swiped aggressively at the manila folder, knocking over my mother crystal wine glass. The expensive red liquid splashed violently across the pristine white marble, pooling around the edges of the fraudulent will he tried to force me to sign. I took a casual step backward, entirely out of his reach. I let him frantically tear the medical records in half. He crumpled the property deed in his sweaty fists, panting heavily as he attempted to destroy the undeniable truth. He was acting like a desperate animal trapped in a corner, completely oblivious to the fact that I had already digitized and securely backed up every document in multiple offshore servers. Tearing paper would not save him from federal prison. "You think ripping up paper changes the county records, DeAndre?" I asked, my voice echoing with icy amusement. "You think destroying a medical file impregnates a dead man? You are entirely out of your league." Isabella was sobbing hysterically, clutching her screaming toddler while pressing her back against the stainless steel refrigerator. My father, Thomas, finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He stepped forward, reaching out to grab DeAndre's shoulder, attempting to restore some shred of order to the chaotic scene. "DeAndre, stop this immediately," Thomas demanded, using his stern corporate tone. "We need to call an attorney and figure out exactly what Isabella has done." Before DeAndre could shove my father away, a terrifying sound pierced the heavy atmosphere of the living room. It started as a distant wail, rapidly escalating into a deafening, ear-splitting screech. The sound of multiple high-decibel sirens completely drowned out Isabella. Panicked sobbing. DeAndre froze. The crumpled documents dropped from his shaking hands, landing in the puddle of spilled wine. Brilliant flashes of intense red and blue light suddenly flooded through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The aggressive strobe effect painted the walls in harsh, alternating colors, casting long, chaotic shadows across the hardwood floor. The flashing lights reflected off the crystal chandeliers, illuminating the absolute terror dawning on DeAndre's face. He looked toward the front windows, his eyes widening in pure horror as the screeching sirens stopped abruptly outside my front gates. Heavy doors slammed shut. Thick boots pounded against the pavement. DeAndre knew exactly what those lights meant. His Friday deadline had expired. The federal audit arrived early, and they brought tactical backup. "No," DeAndre gasped, stumbling backward away from the kitchen island. "No, they cannot be here yet. The audit was not supposed to happen until Monday." I accelerated the timeline, I stated coldly. "I sent the blockchain tracking reports and your offshore routing numbers to the federal authorities yesterday. They found the missing $500,000, DeAndre. They know exactly how you embezzled it from Liam's cybersecurity firm." Heavy fists pounded violently against the heavy oak front door. The sound echoed like a battering ram. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," a booming voice commanded from the front porch. "Open the door immediately." DeAndre panicked. He spun around, looking frantically for a back exit. He took 2 desperate steps toward the rear patio doors, but he was far too late. The heavy oak front door was violently kicked open, the heavy wood splintered inward, crashing loudly against the interior wall. A highly coordinated tactical team of federal agents and local police officers swarmed into the grand foyer. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, dressed in dark tactical gear with weapons drawn and badges clearly displayed. "Get on the ground!" the lead agent roared, storming into the kitchen area and pointing directly at DeAndre. "Get on the floor right now! Show me your hands." DeAndre hesitated for a fraction of a second, his massive ego still struggling to accept his total defeat. That hesitation cost him dearly. 2 federal agents charged forward, grabbing his arms and violently tackling him to the expensive hardwood floor. The impact shook the room. DeAndre let out a sharp grunt of pain as his face was shoved hard against the wood right next to the muddy footprints he had arrogantly tracked into my house just a few days ago. The agents pinned him down securely, twisting his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs, ratcheting tightly around his wrists, echoed through the room. DeAndre Washington, the lead agent, announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and federal conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Isabella let out a blood-curdling shriek. She dropped to her knees, clutching her child and screaming hysterically for our mother. "Mom, do something," Isabella sobbed wildly, reaching a trembling hand toward Catherine. "Tell them to stop. Tell them he did nothing wrong." Catherine stood completely paralyzed. The wealthy, status-obsessed matriarch watched in absolute horror as federal agents secured her criminal son-in-law. Thomas leaned heavily against the wall, clutching his chest, struggling to comprehend the massive criminal scandal that had just obliterated his pristine family reputation. They were totally helpless, trapped in a nightmare they had eagerly helped create. I calmly walked over to the side table. I picked up the delicate crystal wine glass Catherine had abandoned when the panic started. The very expensive Cabernet felt cool against my palm. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the rich, complex flavor. I stood perfectly still, watching the federal agents haul DeAndre to his feet. I watched Isabella weeping on the floor. I watched my parents choking on their own ruined pride. I sipped my wine and watched their pathetic empire of lies burn completely to the ground. The federal agents dragged DeAndre out the front door and shoved him into the back of a waiting armored vehicle. The flashing red and blue lights gradually faded into the distance, leaving my home entirely silent once again. My parents scurried out shortly after, terrified of being associated with a federal arrest. Isabella remained frozen on the kitchen floor until Child Protective Services arrived to temporarily remove Leo from the chaotic environment. I hired a professional cleaning crew the very next morning to scrub every inch of the house, removing any lingering trace of their toxic invasion. The following 6 months unfolded with the brutal, predictable efficiency of a collapsing Ponzi scheme. The justice system moves slowly for some, but when presented with an airtight digital confession and irrefutable forensic evidence, it strikes like lightning. DeAndre's arrogant facade dissolved the moment his expensive defense lawyer reviewed the blockchain tracking data I provided to the authorities. He took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial that would have exposed his massive incompetence to the public. The federal judge showed absolutely no mercy, sentencing him to 8 long years in a high-security penitentiary. His remaining assets were seized and liquidated to begin paying back the $500,000 he stole from my late husband's company. He traded his tailored designer suits and luxury watches for an orange jumpsuit and a concrete cell. Isabella fared no better in the aftermath. The criminal investigation exposed her active complicity in the forged will and her desperate attempt to extort a $1.8 million estate. The public revelation regarding Leo's true paternity destroyed whatever shreds of social credibility she had left. Her wealthy friends abandoned her, instantly disgusted by the sheer magnitude of her deception. Because she was facing severe felony fraud charges, the state deemed her an unfit guardian, resulting in Leo being placed into temporary foster care while the legal battle raged on. The crushing weight of her massive $75,000 credit card debt finally caught up to her. Facing severe financial ruin and drowning in legal fees, Isabella was forced to abandon her luxurious lifestyle. The masterpiece daughter, who had never worked a hard day in her life, found herself scrubbing floors and stocking shelves at a local grocery store, working a grueling minimum wage job just to afford a tiny studio apartment. The beautiful golden child was entirely stripped of her fake glamour, reduced to sweeping up messes made by other people. My parents, Thomas and Catherine, suffered the most poetic destruction of all. Driven by their blind obsession with protecting their favorite daughter, they poured every single dollar they owned into Isabella's criminal defense. They liquidated their robust retirement accounts, sold their luxury vehicles, and mortgaged their immaculate suburban home to hire the most aggressive defense attorneys in Chicago. It was a completely futile effort against the mountain of forensic evidence I had carefully compiled. The exorbitant legal fees bled them entirely dry. Within 4 short months, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on their beautiful property. The respected corporate patriarch and the status-obsessed socialite were forced to declare total bankruptcy. Their prestigious country club memberships were revoked. Their affluent friends stopped returning their phone calls, terrified that the criminal taint might rub off on their own pristine reputations. Thomas and Catherine lost absolutely everything they valued in this world: their money, their house, and their precious social standing. They hit rock bottom on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my sleek glass desk in my new corner office, overlooking the financial district, reviewing a highly lucrative corporate merger. The intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. My receptionist sounded slightly alarmed, stating that my parents were waiting in the lobby demanding to see me immediately. They had bypassed the building security claiming a massive family emergency. I smiled, looking down at the flawless financial reports spread across my desk. I pressed the intercom button and calmly instructed her to send them inside. The heavy glass door to my office swung open. Thomas and Catherine stumbled into the room looking completely unrecognizable. My father wore a wrinkled suit that hung loosely from his diminished frame. My mother possessed hollow, sunken eyes, her expensive highlights fading into a dull gray. They looked completely broken, thoroughly defeated by the massive consequences of their own toxic choices. Catherine immediately burst into frantic tears, rushing toward my desk, with her hands clasped together in a desperate pleading motion. "Naomi, please, you have to help us," she sobbed loudly, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "We lost the house. The bank took everything we owned. We have absolutely nowhere to go, and no money left to pay for food. Isabella is struggling to survive, and Leo is still in state custody. You are a wealthy, successful woman. You have plenty of resources. You must save us. We are your parents. We are your family. Please, Naomi. Family takes care of family." I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic leather chair, resting my hands flat against the cool glass surface of my desk. I looked at the two desperate people standing before me, remembering the day they coldly told me to pack my bags and surrender my home to a fraud. I remembered the vicious live stream, where they publicly disowned me without a single ounce of hesitation. I pressed a silver button hidden beneath my desk, summoning the building security team. Two large uniformed guards entered the office immediately, stepping behind my parents. I looked my mother directly in the eyes, projecting absolute zero emotion. "I only help real family," I stated, my voice razor sharp and colder than ice. "You are just biological DNA to me. Get them out of my building and ensure they are permanently banned from the premises." Thomas' face crumpled into pure despair as the large security guards firmly grabbed their shaking arms and aggressively escorted them out the heavy glass door forever. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing my past away for good. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my temporary Chicago office and watched the two small figures of my parents being escorted down the sidewalk by building security until they disappeared around the corner, completely swallowed by the bustling city crowds. They thought I would break under their pressure, but they were completely and utterly wrong. I knew they would spend the rest of their miserable lives regretting the day they ever decided to cross me like that. I felt an incredible, profound sense of absolute closure. The parasitic infection that had drained my energy and exploited my loyalty for 33 years was finally entirely eradicated from my life. I turned away from the window, walking back to my desk to finalize the corporate merger documents. My focus was unbreakable. 6 months after that final, satisfying confrontation, I made a massive, monumental decision. Chicago held too many ghosts, too many echoes of a life built around accommodating the toxic expectations of people who never truly valued me. I sold the $1.8 million estate in Lincoln Park, the very house Isabella and DeAndre had so desperately tried to steal. The property sale brought in a tremendous influx of liquid capital, providing me with the ultimate freedom to completely redefine my future on my own terms. I packed up my life, my firm, and my memories of Liam, and relocated my entire existence to the vibrant, relentless energy of New York City. I now stand in my brand new, expansive corner office, located on the 60th floor of a towering skyscraper in Lower Manhattan. The panoramic view of the iconic skyline stretches out before me, a breathtaking tapestry of steel and glass, reflecting the bright morning sunlight. My new firm occupies the entire top floor, a testament to the aggressive expansion and massive success I achieved after shedding the dead weight of my biological relatives. But my most important achievement is not the lucrative corporate contracts or the high-end real estate. My greatest victory is the foundation I built from the ashes of their criminal conspiracy. When the federal courts finished dismantling DeAndre and prosecuting his massive corporate wire fraud, the justice system ordered full financial restitution. Through aggressive asset forfeiture and specialized corporate insurance recoveries, The entire $500,000 he had embezzled from Liam's cybersecurity firm was successfully retrieved. Because of my pivotal role in uncovering the fraud and my status as Liam's sole legal heir, the company board awarded me those recovered funds as a massive financial settlement. I refused to absorb that money into my personal wealth. It felt too heavy, too deeply connected to the ugly trauma of betrayal. Instead, I used every single penny of that recovered $500,000 to launch the Liam Heritage Legal Foundation. The foundation operates directly out of my Manhattan office suite. We provide absolute top-tier free forensic accounting and aggressive legal support to vulnerable women facing severe financial abuse in toxic marriages or manipulative families. We specialize in hunting down hidden assets, exposing forged financial documents, and utterly destroying the financial predators who think they can exploit grieving widows or isolated wives. Every time my team traces a hidden offshore account or invalidates a fraudulent property deed, I feel my husband's presence standing right beside me. We turned a disgusting criminal betrayal into a powerful, relentless shield for women who desperately need a brilliant tactical defense. Looking out over the sprawling city, I take a slow, deep breath of the crisp, recycled office air. The sharp pain of losing Liam will always remain a quiet echo in my heart, but the overwhelming, suffocating grief has smoothly transitioned into a powerful driving force. The horrific ambush at his funeral feels like a distant, bizarre nightmare starring people I barely recognize anymore. I often reflect on the profound clarity that absolute betrayal brings to your life. Society conditions us to believe that blood relations demand unconditional loyalty. We are taught to forgive endless disrespect, to absorb continuous cruelty, and to endlessly sacrifice our own peace simply because we share genetic material with our abusers. That is a dangerous, suffocating lie. I learned the hard way that cutting out toxic roots is the absolute only way you can ever truly bloom. A diseased tree cannot be healed by ignoring the rot eating away at its core. You have to take a sharp axe and sever the dying branches completely before they spread their poison to the healthy leaves. My parents and my sister demanded absolute devotion while eagerly planning my total destruction. They viewed my compassion as a weakness to be exploited, and my grief as a convenient financial opportunity. They believed their titles as mother, father, and sister granted them immunity from the consequences of their vile actions. True family is never determined by a birth certificate. True family is deliberately chosen. Family consists of the people who fiercely protect your dignity when you are broken, the people who stand like an iron wall between you and those who wish to do you harm. Family is the network of loyal friends, respected colleagues, and trusted allies who show up when the storm hits, not the scavengers who circle overhead, waiting for you to collapse. I built my chosen family here in Manhattan, surrounded by brilliant, resilient people who value my mind and respect my unyielding boundaries. I walked through the absolute darkest fires of grief and betrayal, and I emerged forged into something completely unbreakable. I am no longer the obedient, quiet sister or the useful financial asset. I am the architect of my own incredible reality, completely untouchable and entirely free. Have you ever had to legally or emotionally destroy someone who thought they could walk all over you? Tell me your story in the comments below, and hit subscribe if you believe karma is best served ice cold. The story of Naomi serves as a powerful and gripping testament to a difficult but necessary truth-sharing. Biological DNA does not automatically grant someone the title of family. Throughout her harrowing journey, Naomi faced the ultimate betrayal not from strangers, but from the very people society dictates she should trust unconditionally: her parents and her sister. Their willingness to exploit her profound grief, attempt to steal her hard-earned assets, and publicly defame her to cover up a corporate crime highlights a toxic reality that many individuals endure but are often too afraid to acknowledge. The most profound lesson to draw from her experience is the vital, life-saving importance of setting absolute and uncompromising boundaries. Society frequently conditions us to absorb disrespect, manipulation, and cruelty simply because it originates from blood relatives. We are repeatedly told to keep the peace, compromise our own well-being, and forgive the unforgivable in the name of familial loyalty. However, Naomi's clinical rationale and unyielding response to her sister's fabricated narrative, and her parents' willing complicity, demonstrates that self-preservation must always come first. By treating her toxic relatives exactly as they proved themselves to be, as active adversaries rather than loved ones, she successfully reclaimed her power and her peace of mind. Cutting out toxic roots is never an act of malice. It is a fundamental requirement for personal growth and long-term survival. Naomi's ultimate victory was not merely recovering her financial assets or watching her abusers face federal justice. Her true triumph was the liberating realization that she possessed the power to intentionally choose her own family. True family consists only of those who protect your dignity, respect your boundaries, and stand beside you during your darkest hours. If you are currently sacrificing your own peace for toxic relatives, take a brave step back today and reevaluate who truly deserves a place in your life.